The night air hung thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, the hum of city lights in the distance muffling the quiet whisper of wind through the open window. Lena leaned against the sill, staring up at the sky. The stars seemed dimmer tonight, obscured by the heavy clouds rolling in. She sighed, fingers gripping the cold glass of the window pane. The feeling had been growing stronger lately, a deep, gnawing sense of something missing inside her. It wasn't just an ordinary teenage restlessness. It was something else, something far more unsettling. Behind her, the glow of a computer screen flickered in the darkness. Dr. Varun, her adoptive father, was still in his lab, deep in research. He barely noticed when she wandered past the half-open door, her eyes drawn to the metallic cabinets filled with vials of strange, luminous liquids. Lena had always been told not to touch anything in the lab, but tonight she couldn't help herself. Soft blue glow caught her attention, a small glass vial sitting on the counter, swirling with an otherworldly liquid. The moment her eyes landed on it, a strange pull gripped her chest. It was as if the vial was calling to her. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, her mind battling between hesitation and curiosity. One sip wouldn't hurt, right? Just a taste. The cool liquid slipped past her lips, and instantly something deep within her stirred. It was not a gentle shift, but an overwhelming wave of energy crashing through her veins. Her vision blurred. The room spun. Her body trembled as if every cell was waking up from a deep slumber. Something was happening, something she couldn't stop. Lena gasped, stumbling back as her reflection in the glass cabinet flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough to send her heart pounding. Her reflection wasn't just her own, it was shifting, and it wasn't human anymore. The night was quiet, save for the occasional drip of rain tapping against the rooftop. The city lights in the distance barely reached the dimly lit street where Lena stood, peering out of her bedroom window. The air carried the scent of wet pavement, but Lena barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere. Something inside her felt off. It wasn't the kind of feeling she could explain in words. It was like a quiet voice inside her head whispering, nudging her towards something unknown. An ache deep in her bones, a restlessness in her chest. She turned away from the window and glanced down the dim hallway. The faint hum of machinery echoed from her father's laboratory, the same way it always did late at night. Dr. Varun was always working, always chasing answers to questions Lena wasn't sure she wanted to ask. But tonight was different. She wasn't sure what pushed her to do it, curiosity, boredom, or that strange voice inside her. But before she could talk herself out of it, Lena stepped out of her room and walked down the hall. The door to the lab was slightly ajar. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, listening for any signs that Dr. Varun was still awake. Nothing. She stepped inside. Rows of glass cabinets lined the walls, each filled with vials of different colors, some glowing faintly under the sterile white light. The air smelled of chemicals and something alien. Lena had spent her whole life around Dr. Varun's research, but she had never dared to touch anything before. But then she saw it. A single vial, different from the rest, resting on the edge of the counter as if it had been placed there just for her. It pulsed with a soft blue glow, swirling with something alive inside. Her fingers twitched at her sides. It was calling to her. She couldn't explain why, but she knew deep in her gut that this vial was important, that it was meant for her. Before she could stop herself, she reached out and wrapped her fingers around the cool glass. A shock ran up her arm, like a jolt of static electricity. Her breath hitched, but she didn't let go. Instead, she pulled the stopper free and, without thinking, tipped the vial to her lips. The liquid was cold, almost freezing as it slipped down her throat. Then the pain hit. A sharp burning sensation bloomed in her chest, spreading outward like wildfire. Lena stumbled back, knocking over a stack of papers as she clutched her ribs. Her vision blurred. The room spun. Her skin tingled, shifted, as if something inside her was rearranging itself. She looked up and gasped. Her reflection in the glass cabinet wasn't normal. For a fleeting second, her face flickered, shifting between familiar and something else. Something with silver-hued skin and glowing violet eyes. Oh, and just as quickly as it came, the reflection snapped back to normal. Lena staggered, her heart pounding. What had she just done? Her fingers shook as she touched her own face, half expecting it to feel different, but it was still the same dark eyes, the same human skin. But it didn't feel the same. A deep hum thrummed beneath her skin, a vibration in her bones. She could hear things, far-off voices, whispers in the air that weren't there before, and in the back of her mind something stirred, Something awake, she needed to get out of there. Lena grabbed the fallen papers, stacking them hurriedly before slipping out of the lab, heart hammering in her chest. She barely made it back to her room before her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto her bed, pressing her palms against her temples, trying to steady her breathing. Everything was fine. It was probably just some weird reaction. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe it would go away. But deep down, she knew the truth. Whatever she had just drunk, it had changed something inside her, and there was no going back. Lena woke with a gasp. Her body jerked upright, drenched in sweat. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts, her heart hammering so loudly it echoed in her ears. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The darkness of her room felt unfamiliar, suffocating, like the walls had closed in overnight. She pressed her palms against her forehead, trying to steady herself. Then she remembered. The vial, the strange liquid, the burning sensation that had ripped through her body the night before. Her hands shook as she reached for her bedside lamp, fingers fumbling against the switch. The soft glow illuminated her room, and she let out a breath. Everything looked normal. Her desk cluttered with notebooks and loose sketches, the pile of clothes she hadn't bothered to fold. The window still open, letting in the cool morning air. She forced herself to her feet, limbs sluggish, like she had just woken from a 100-year sleep. Every step felt off, like she was moving in a body that wasn't entirely hers. The moment she reached her mirror, her stomach twisted into knots. Her reflection stared back, but something wasn't right. Her eyes, they weren't their usual deep brown. They flickered, just for a second, shifting into a glowing violet hue, the same shade she had seen in the lab's glass cabinet. Lena stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. What the hell was happening to her? She squeezed her eyes shut, counting to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When she opened them again, they were normal. Maybe she was just exhausted. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. Yeah, that had to be it. But then she reached for her dresser, and her hand phased right through it. Lena yanked her arm back with a strangled yelp. Her fingers tingled as if they had briefly disappeared into another dimension. She stared at her hand, turning it over, wiggling her fingers. It looked real. It felt real. Hesitantly, she reached for the dresser again. This time, her fingers met solid wood. "What the hell?" she whispered. Her heartbeat was erratic now, an uneven staccato rhythm that refused to slow. This wasn't just exhaustion. This wasn't just her imagination. She was changing. The growing fear and knock at the door made her jump. Elena. A voice called. Her stomach clenched. It was Jonas. Yeah? She said quickly, rubbing her hands against her jeans as if she could wipe away whatever was happening to her. Jonas pushed open the door, his usual lopsided grin in place. He had been her best friend since childhood. The only person outside of Dr. Varun who truly understood her. Or at least, he thought he did. "You okay?" he asked. "You weren't at school yesterday, and your dad looked super stressed when I asked about you." Lena forced a smile. "Yeah, I just wasn't feeling great." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You look kind of pale." "Well, paler than usual." Lena waved him off, stepping toward her window to avoid his gaze. She needed to act normal. Whatever was happening to her, she couldn't let him see it. "I'm fine, just tired." Jonas didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he flopped onto her bed, grabbing one of her notebooks and flipping through the pages. "I was going to ask if you wanted to come to the skate park later. Thought it might help get your mind off whatever's going on." Lena hesitated. So the idea of pretending everything was normal sounded exhausting. But staying locked up in her room, terrified of her own reflection, wasn't much better. "Yeah," she said finally. "Maybe." Jonas shot her a grin. "Cool. I'll text you later." He pushed himself off the bed and headed for the door, but just as he reached for the handle, Lena felt it again. A pulse in the air, a deep thrumming vibration that ran beneath her skin. And then, without warning, the light bulb above them flickered violently and shattered. Glass rained down onto the floor. Jonas cursed, jumping back. "Whoa, what the hell?" Lena stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Jonas turned to her, eyes wide. "Did you see that? That was crazy." Lena swallowed hard. She could still feel it, that strange electric energy, humming just beneath her skin. "Why, yeah," she stammered. "Weird." Jonas glanced between her and the broken glass, but before he could say anything, a voice echoed from down the hall. "Lena?" "Dr. Varun." Lena's stomach twisted. "Well, I gotta clean this up," she said quickly. already moving toward the shards of glass on the floor. "I'll see you later, okay?" Jonas hesitated for a second before nodding. "All right, just text me if you need anything." As soon as he was gone, Lena exhaled sharply, pressing a trembling hand against her forehead. The vial had done something to her. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything. Her body wasn't stable. Her abilities were leaking through, and she had no idea how to control them. The growing suspicion by the time Lena made it downstairs, Dr. Varun was already in his lab, pacing in front of a screen filled with strange symbols and equations. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his mind was clearly racing. She hesitated at the doorway. Had he noticed the missing vial? "Lena," he said without looking up, his voice tense. "Did you come into the lab last night?" Her stomach clenched. "What? No," she lied. Dr. Varun finally turned to her, studying her carefully. For a moment she was afraid he could see the lie on her face. "Strange," he murmured. "One of my vials is missing." Lena forced her expression to remain neutral. "Maybe it fell somewhere." Dr. Varun didn't answer. He just exhaled and rubbed his temples. "This isn't good. That formula wasn't ready. If someone took it," his voice trailed off, eyes darkening with worry. Lena's pulse raced. He knew. Maybe not about her, but he knew something was wrong. She had to fix this. She had to figure out what was happening to her before he did. The weight of the missing vial hung over Lena like a dark cloud. Dr. Varun was suspicious, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he connected the dots. But she didn't have time to wait for him to figure it out. She needed answers. The changes in her body were getting worse. It wasn't just the flickering eyes or the occasional phasing through objects. Her skin felt too tight. Her senses were heightened to unbearable levels. And sometimes when she concentrated too hard, she could hear thoughts that weren't hers. She had to find out what was happening before it spiraled completely out of control. Lena sat hunched over her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. She had spent the past hour scouring every obscure science forum she could find, searching for anything that could explain what was happening to her. Nothing. All she could find were vague theories about genetic modifications and alien physiology. Frustrated, she leaned back, rubbing her temples. She needed someone who knew about this, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. And then she remembered. Professor Hale. Dr. Edwin Hale was a scientist known for his work in exobiology, the study of alien life forms. Lena had heard his name before, mostly in whispers, and she knew Dr. Varun had studied some of his theories. If anyone could help her, it was him. She found his contact information buried in a forgotten forum thread. The address listed was on the outskirts of town, an old research facility that had been shut down years ago. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. Getting to the facility wasn't easy. She had to sneak out after Dr. Varun fell asleep, using the shadows to her advantage. Her abilities were unstable, but she was slowly learning how to use them. A quick test confirmed that if she focused just right, she could turn nearly invisible for a few seconds at a time. Not perfect, but enough. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, the air was thick with mist, and the abandoned research facility loomed ahead like a ghost from the past. Lena's breath hitched as she approached the rusted metal doors. There was no sign of movement inside. The place looked empty. But the moment she touched the door handle, a voice rang out behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Lena whirled around, heart pounding. A woman stood in the shadows, arms crossed. She was tall, with short silver hair and piercing green eyes that weren't human. Lena swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The woman stepped forward. "My name is Sarah, and if you're looking for Professor Hale, you're too late." Lena's stomach dropped. Too late? Sarah sighed, glancing around before motioning for her to follow. "Come inside. It's not safe to talk out here." Lena hesitated, but eventually stepped through the doors after her. The inside of the facility was dusty and abandoned, the remnants of old lab equipment scattered across the floor. Sarah led her into what looked like an old office, pulling out a chair before sitting across from her. Lena sat, tense about your get. "What do you mean, too late?" Sarah leaned forward. Forward disappeared months ago. The government was watching him. They knew he was getting too close to something. Lena's hands tightened into fists. "Do you know what he was working on?" Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then she exhaled. "I think you already know the answer." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. "You're like me, aren't you?" Sarah continued, tilting her head. I'm not human. Lena's heart pounded. She had never met another alien before. She had always known she was different, but this was the first time she had ever come face to face with someone like her. She could barely find her voice. How do you know? Sarah gave a small smirk. I can sense it. It's in the way your energy moves. It's unstable, isn't it? Your body feels wrong. Lena swallowed hard. I drank something, a formula from my father's lab, and now I don't know what's happening to me. Sarah's expression darkened. What did it look like? A blue liquid. It glowed. Sarah sucked in a sharp breath. That wasn't just any formula. That was a genetic activator. Lena blinked. What? Sarah leaned back. Your kind, our kind. We're never meant to stay in one form. The formula didn't just enhance your abilities. It's awakening something inside you that was never supposed to be contained. Lena's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Sarah hesitated, then finally said, It means you don't have much time before your body stops obeying the laws of this world. Lena felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her body was changing. Her DNA was unraveling, rewriting itself into something new. Something she might not be able to stop. I need to fix this, she said, voice shaking. There has to be a way to reverse it. Sarah shook her head. I don't think you understand. This isn't something you can fix. Your body is evolving. You're becoming what you were meant to be. Lena gritted her teeth. I don't want to evolve. I just want to be normal. Sarah's eyes softened, but before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside. Lena jumped to her feet. Sarah swore under her breath. We need to go. Now. Lena barely had time to react before the doors burst open and a group of armed agents stormed in. Government agents. They had found her. Lena's heart pounded as panic surged through her. She wasn't ready for this. Sarah grabbed her wrist. Hold on. Before Lena could ask what she meant, Sarah's entire body shimmered, and then they vanished. It was like stepping through a rip in space itself. The world twisted around her, and then darkness. The world twisted around Lena. One moment she was in the abandoned lab, surrounded by armed agents, and the next darkness. Her stomach flipped as if she were being pulled through space itself. Her skin tingled. Her bones felt like they were dissolving, and the air around her was wrong, heavy, thick, alien. And then she landed. Hard. Lena hit the ground with a gasp, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Cold stone pressed against her palms. A strange humming filled her ears. She tried to focus, blinking rapidly. Where am I? The room was unlike anything she had ever seen before. The walls pulsed with an eerie bioluminescent glow, shifting between deep blues and purples. Strange symbols carved into the floor shimmered beneath her fingertips. It wasn't just a place. It felt like something alive, a rift between realities. Sarah stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her. Not bad for your first jump, she said. Most people throw up. Lena sat up, rubbing her head. What just happened? Where are we? Sarah extended a hand, helping her up. Somewhere safe, for now. Lena's legs wobbled as she stood, her body still adjusting. The world felt off, like gravity had slightly shifted, like time didn't move normally here. She turned to Sarah. You teleported us? Sarah shook her head. I folded space. We didn't move through it. We moved around it. Lena's brain struggled to process that. Doesn't make sense. Sarah smirked. It's not supposed to. Lena exhaled, trying to steady herself. The events of the past 24 hours crashed down on her all at once. Drinking the vial, her body changing Dr. Varun's suspicions, the government agents, and now this. She clenched her fists. You said I'm evolving. That my body wasn't meant to stay in one form. What does that mean? Sarah's expression darkened. It means your human form is breaking down. The formula didn't just awaken your true nature. It's accelerating it. Your DNA is unraveling. Lena's chest tightened. So what happens when it finishes? Sarah hesitated. You become something else. Something this world might not be able to contain. Lena's blood ran cold. I don't want that, she said, voice shaking. I don't want to lose myself. Sarah studied her for a moment, then sighed. There's only one way to stop it. Lena's eyes snapped to hers. How? Sarah turned away, staring at the glowing symbols on the wall. You need to find the core. Lena frowned. The core? It's what stabilizes your kind. Without it, your energy has no anchor. You keep shifting until there's nothing left of your original form. Lena's heart pounded. Where do I find it? Syrah's lips pressed into a thin line. It won't be easy. And the people after you? They're looking for it too. Lena inhaled sharply. Of course. The government wasn't just after her. They knew something she didn't. They knew about the core. And if they got to it first, she didn't want to think about that. We need to move, Syrah said, turning back to her. Every second we waste, your body breaks down further. Lena swallowed the fear clawing at her throat. She had no choice. She had no choice. If she wanted to survive, she had to find the core before it was too late and before she lost herself forever. The moment Lena and Syrah stepped through the next rift, they emerged into chaos. The city around them was burning. Flames licked at the edges of buildings, casting eerie shadows against the smoke-filled sky. People ran through the streets in panic, their screams barely audible over the distant roar of explosions. Lena's stomach dropped. What is this? She stammered. Syrah's jaw tightened. E-war zone. Lena spun, her eyes darting across the burning wreckage. But this is my city. This is... She stopped, because something was wrong. The buildings looked familiar, but off. The streets twisted in ways they shouldn't. Some structures looked years older than they should be, others barely built. It was as if time itself had fractured, splitting reality into a mismatched version of what she knew. And then she saw them. Dark figures moving through the wreckage, clad in black armor, their faces hidden behind reflective helmets. Not government agents. Something worse. Syrah cursed under her breath. They're already here. Lena's pulse spiked. Who are they? Syrah grabbed her wrist. Not people you want to fight. Move, they ran, dodging through crumbling alleyways, the scent of smoke clogging Lena's lungs. The further they went, the more Lena felt it, a pull. Like something inside her was being drawn toward a specific point. She skidded to a stop. It's here, she whispered. Syrah turned. What? Lena closed her eyes, focusing. The pull wasn't just instinct, it was calling her. I can feel it, she said. The core, it's close. Syrah hesitated, then nodded. Then we find it. Fast. But before they could take another step, a deafening roar shattered the air. Lena whipped around just in time to see the dark-armored figures descending upon them. Syrah pushed her forward. Run! But it was too late. A figure lunged, grabbing Lena's wrist, and everything went dark. The darkness wasn't empty. It was alive. Lena felt herself being pulled, her body weightless, her mind flickering between consciousness and something deep. Images flashed in her mind. Memories that weren't hers, visions of places that didn't exist, voices whispering in a language she didn't understand. Then suddenly, light, searing white light pierced the darkness, forcing Lena to shield her eyes. The weightless sensation vanished, and before she could react, she crashed onto a cold, metallic floor. Lena groaned, pushing herself up. The air was sterile, artificial. The room around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. Smooth silver walls pulsing with dim blue lights, forming strange symbols that flickered like an alien heartbeat. This wasn't Earth. She wasn't sure it was even real. A sharp voice cut through the silence. She's awake. Lena's heart pounded as she turned. The dark-armored figures surrounded her, their reflective visors concealing their faces. But the one standing at the center, taller, cloaked in something more advanced, stepped forward. Lena, his voice was smooth, controlled, too calm. How do you know my name? She demanded, forcing herself to stand. The figure tilted his head. Because we have been watching you for a long time. Lena clenched her fists. Who are you? He exhaled slowly. You Commander Rylan of the Dominion. Lena's breath caught the Dominion. She had heard that name whispered in classified reports from her father's lab. A force beyond Earth's understanding, an intergalactic authority hunting for something on this planet. And now they had found her. What do you want from me? She asked, voice sharp. Commander Rylan took a step forward, and the air shifted around him, like the space itself bent in his presence. The core, Lena, he said simply. We know it is inside you. Lena's blood ran cold. Inside me, her body trembled. It all made sense now. The formula didn't just activate her latent abilities. It unlocked something buried deep within her DNA. The core wasn't an object. It was her. Lena staggered back. You're wrong, she said. I don't have the core. Rylan let out a small, knowing smile. You still don't understand, do you? A pulse of energy surged through the room, and suddenly, Lena felt it. Something deep within her stirred. A force unlike anything she had ever known. It pulsed in her veins, shifting beneath her skin, warping her very being. Her knees buckled and she gasped. Syrah's warning echoed in her mind. Your human form is breaking down. She clutched her head as the pain struck, like every cell in her body was being rewritten again. Her vision blurred, her senses exploded outward. She could hear the hum of the walls, the distant thoughts of the soldiers, the very fabric of space singing in her ears. She was becoming something else, something more. Rylan watched her struggle with a calm expression. You were never meant to be human, Lena. Lena's breathing turned ragged. She looked down at her hands. Her fingers were flickering, shifting between solid and light, between reality and something beyond it. No. She didn't want this. She didn't want to lose herself. A loud crack tore through the room. The walls shattered like glass, space fracturing in brilliant streaks of blue and white. And through the chaos, Sira appeared. She moved like a blur, phasing through the soldiers as if they weren't there. Before Rylan could react, she grabbed Lena's arm, and reality tore open. The world ripped apart and they fell. When Lena's vision cleared, they were standing in an endless expanse, a void of stars, shifting light, and swirling galaxies. A place between worlds. Sira turned to her, gripping her shoulders. Elena, listen to me. You don't have much time. Lena's breath was shaky. What's happening to me? Sira's gaze softened. You are becoming. Lena swallowed hard. I don't want this. I just want to be human. Sira's eyes were sad. Lena, you never were. Lena's heart pounded. The truth pressed down on her like an unbearable weight. She could feel it now, the raw power inside her, uncontained. She was no longer just a girl, no longer just a scientist's daughter. She was something else entirely. And she had a choice to make, stay human or embrace what she was meant to be. She exhaled. And then, finally, she let go. Light erupted from Lena's body. Her form shifted, expanded, her mind stretching beyond the confines of reality itself. She was no longer bound by human limits, her body made of energy, her thoughts spanning time and space. She could see everything. She was everything. Sira smiled. You're ready? Lena turned, her new form pulsing with light. What now? Sira smirked. And now, we take down the Dominion. Lena smiled, and then she disappeared into the stars. The end.